Hello, my name is Lynn Robertson. I'm a competition expert in the OECD Competition Division, and today I have the pleasure to be with Frédéric Jenny, who's the chair of our OECD Competition Committee. We're at the Latin American and Caribbean Competition Forum. In fact, it's the 16th edition of this event. We work with the IADB to put it together each year for the members of the bank in the region. Fred, what I'd like to talk to you a bit about today is how competition has evolved across the region, but how has the Latin American and Caribbean Competition Forum kept up with the changes that have occurred within the region on competition law and policy, and particularly competition enforcement? How do we stay current? How does the LACCF continue to attract such a large and dynamic crowd?
I think there are two dimensions of this. One of them is that if we go back 16 years, this was roughly year 2000, and since then we've seen major developments in competition law. We've seen reforms in countries like Brazil or Mexico, for example. We've seen countries that have adopted competition law. So it's quite clear. I mean, there's been more and more trust in competition law as being an important instrument for markets. And certainly the IDB has been pushing this agenda in a very effective way. The second thing is how this group of countries that meet regularly once a year, how they have evolved and how the relationship with the OECD also has evolved. And there I would say that there have been several phases, and those phases are indicative of a slow maturity coming to those countries. I remember that in the first few meetings of the LACCF, we talked a lot about the instruments of competition policy. There was a need for a better understanding of all those instruments could be implemented. Then we moved to a phase where there was a great appetite to look at common issues. For example, transportation, airline, or electricity, because all the countries were faced with dominant firms in those sectors, and those network industries were a great source of interest. Then we moved to a third phase where we are right now, I would say, which is the interface between competition law enforcement and other policies. How does that work? This was preceded first by an exploration of the legal systems of the different countries, which are, of course, quite similar because they're all based on civil law. But we moved from there to the interface between competition policy and other policies that we may have. For example, at this LACCF meeting, we're going to talk about the relationship between competition policy and industrial policy. We talk about the relationship between competition policy and advocacy in general. So one can see that moving out of competition law enforcement, which becomes more familiar to all the country, there is a need to integrate competition into a wider perspective of economic policies.
And if I gave you a crystal ball and I said, Frédéric, where do you think we're going to be, say, in the 20th LACCF? What type of topics do you think we'd be addressing? How would you reply?
Well, I think that for the LACCF, but not only for the LACCF, the challenges that we have are at two levels. I would say a technical level and a political level, so to speak. The technical level is going to be to develop techniques that are going to be useful to look at competition issues in the digital economy. And we haven't yet come to the end of this. The OECD has been doing a lot of work, but this is slowly but surely going to be a source of interest for many countries. So revising our instruments or looking at new issues that come because of the digital economy, that's going to be important. The second issue is whether or not we should include dimensions of inclusiveness or fairness or distribution into competition law. This is a question which is raised all over the world these days. This is, I think, only the beginning of the discussion. And I expect that within 2 or 3 years, we will have better ideas about how to do that, how not to appear to be an isolated economic policy in a sea of recriminations about increasing inequality, etc. How to make competition work for everybody.
Thank you very much for your time today.